It all begins when a new housekeeper enters a millionaire's mansion, and upon seeing old photographs on the mantelpiece, her entire body freezes. In desperation, she cries out, "Sir, these children lived with me at the orphanage," revealing a connection no one could have imagined. From this shock, a secret buried for nearly 30 years resurfaces, bringing to light the mysterious disappearance of the master's twin brother. And this revelation not only changes the course of the investigation, but also begins a journey capable of rebuilding or destroying an entire family. The rain drummed against the windows of the mansion as Grace Holloway held the strap of her worn-out handbag tightly, her eyes scanning every detail of the entrance hall that looked more like the lobby of a five-star hotel. The marble floor reflected the lights from the crystal chandeliers, and she felt a tightness in her chest, imagining how much it would cost to replace just one of those pieces if something happened during cleaning. Her fingers tightened even more on the worn strap of her bag, a mixture of nervousness and determination coursing through her slender body. The woman who had received her, Mrs. Beatrice, the head housekeeper, watched Grace. With that appraising gaze, she knew well after years of working in other people's homes. It was always like this. The first day in any new job brought with it this feeling of being judged, measured, compared to some invisible standard that only the employers knew. Grace straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and returned the look with the dignity her mother had always taught her to maintain, no matter the size of the house or the thickness of the owner's wallets. Mrs. Beatrice was a woman in her 60s with grey hair tied in an impeccable bun, her navy blue uniform perfectly starched. She had that rigid posture of someone who commanded a team with an iron fist, but Grace noticed a certain kindness hidden in the corner of her eyes when the housekeeper finally smiled, albeit discreetly. "Mr. Arthur will be here shortly," Mrs. Beatrice said, gesturing for Grace to follow her through the wide corridors. "He usually has lunch at home on Thursdays, so you'll have the opportunity to meet him today. He's a good man, but very reserved. He lost his wife just over a year ago. And since then, the house has been different, quieter, if... You know what I mean?" Grace nodded, absorbing every piece of information as she always did. Knowing the employers meant understanding their routines, their preferences, their moods. It was the difference between keeping a job or being dismissed in the first few weeks, and she desperately needed this job. The last few months had been especially difficult after what happened at the previous house, that unfounded accusation that had nearly destroyed her reputation. Thankfully, she had managed to prove her innocence before the case went any further. But the stain remained. Whispers of gossip echoed through the corridors of employment. Agencies. The house was immense, with at least 3 floors that Grace could quickly count. Mrs. Beatrice explained the routines as they walked, pointing to the different rooms: the main living room, the library, the master's study, which was always locked, the guest rooms on the first floor. On the second floor were Arthur's private quarters and his daughter's room. "The girl, Lily, is 7 years old," the housekeeper continued, and this time Grace noticed a change in her tone, something between concern and sadness. "She's a special child, very fragile after all she's been through. She prefers to stay in her room most of the time. She has difficulty with strangers, so don't be alarmed if she doesn't speak to you right away. In fact, the little one hasn't spoken to almost anyone since the accident that took her mother." Grace felt her heart ache. She knew that pain of losing someone important too soon all too well. She herself had grown up without parents, left at an orphanage at the age of 5 after they were killed in a bus crash on the motorway. The memories of that place still visited her on sleepless nights. Faces of children, who were her only family for years, voices echoing through the cold corridors, the smell of disinfectant mixed with reheated food. They climbed the main staircase, and Grace noticed the photographs that decorated the walls. Family photos, happy moments frozen in time. A handsome man with a broad smile next to an elegant woman with brown hair, a little girl on her lap. Other photos showed celebrations, holidays, ordinary moments that seemed extraordinary when framed on those walls. Grace quickly looked away, trying not to invade the intimacy of those memories that did not belong to her. "Your room is here on the first floor near the service wing," Mrs. Beatrice explained, opening a door that revealed a simple but comfortable room. Nothing compared to the master's rooms, of course, but infinitely better than the places Grace had lived in recent years. A single bed, a small wardrobe, a desk by the window overlooking the back gardens. There was even a private bathroom, a luxury she hadn't expected. The uniform is in the wardrobe, 2 sets for you to alternate. Laundry is done on Tuesdays and Fridays. Your days off will be Sundays and 1 free afternoon during the week, to be arranged. Payment is on the 5th of each month, direct deposit to the account you provided. Any questions so far? Grace shook her head, still processing everything. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she had dared to dream of when she saw the job advertisement at the agency. Mrs. Beatrice handed her a detailed list of daily tasks, schedules, specific cleaning products for each type of surface. Grace read it quickly, her mind already organizing an efficient routine. Half an hour later, already dressed in the light grey uniform, Grace began her duties. She started with the guest rooms on the first floor, places that were clearly not used often. The dust accumulated on the surfaces told stories of loneliness, of a house too large for the few people who inhabited it. As she cleaned, Grace found herself thinking about her employer, that man who had lost his wife and was now raising a traumatized daughter in a mansion full of echoes and silences. The sound of an approaching car interrupted her. Grace discreetly peeked through the window and saw a black Bentley parking in the drive. A man got out of the vehicle, tall, broad-shouldered, in an impeccable dark suit. Even from a distance, Grace could see his weary posture, his shoulders slightly slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. This must be Arthur Kensington, the owner of the house, the millionaire businessman who ran one of the most famous restaurants in London. Grace went downstairs quickly, wanting to be busy and discreet when her employer entered. Mrs. Beatrice was already waiting for him in the hall, taking his briefcase and coat in a ritual that seemed to be repeated daily. Grace pretended to be checking the ornamental plants in the living room, but her ears caught every word of the conversation. "Lunch is served, Mr. Arthur, and the new staff member started today. She's settling in well," the housekeeper informed him. "Excellent," he replied in a deep, tired voice. "How is Lily?" "Still in her room, sir. I took her breakfast up, but she ate very little. The private tutor will be here at 3. Arthur sighed deeply, and Grace felt the pain in that sigh as if it were her own. "I'll keep trying," he said quietly, before heading up the stairs. Grace returned to her work, her heart heavy for this broken family trying to move forward. The rest of the morning passed quickly between cleaning tasks, organizing, and small repairs she noticed and fixed without needing instructions. She was skilled with her hands, had learned to be self-sufficient from a young age, and this always impressed her employers. It was late in the afternoon, as Grace began to clean the ground floor rooms, that she noticed a slightly ajar door that had been closed before. The study. Mrs. Beatrice had mentioned it was usually locked, but perhaps her employer had forgotten to close it when he left. Grace hesitated. She shouldn't enter without permission, but the open door was a silent invitation, and doing her job meant cleaning every room in the house. She knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Arthur?" No answer. She pushed the door open carefully and entered the study, a tastefully decorated masculine space. Bookshelves covered 2 entire walls, a large mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and comfortable leather armchairs were strategically placed. But what caught her attention was the stone fireplace on the opposite wall, decorated with old photographs in silver frames. Grace approached, curiosity overcoming caution. The photos showed 2 identical children, twin boys who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. They smiled at the camera, chubby faces, bright eyes full of life. One photo showed the boys in an embrace, wearing matching T-shirts. Another showed them in a park, playing on a swing. There were also family photos, a young couple with the 2 boys, moments of happiness frozen in time. Grace picked up one of the frames to get a better look, her heart starting to beat faster. There was something familiar about those faces, something that touched an old memory stored in the deepest recesses of her mind. The eyes of those children, the shape of their faces, that specific smile. She knew that smile. She knew those eyes. Her hands began to tremble. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the more she looked, the more certain she became. Those boys, or at least one of them, had been part of her life in a distant past. At St. Anthony's Orphanage, where she had grown up between the ages of 6 and 16. There had been a boy there, a boy who arrived when he was about 6, too thin, frightened, but with those same eyes that now stared back at her from the photograph. Grace put the frame back with trembling hands and picked up another photo. It was a larger image, older from the yellowish tone of the paper. The two twin boys, no more than 4 years old, at some kind of children's party. There was a detail she couldn't ignore, a small birthmark on the neck of one of the boys, on the right side, just below his ear. She knew that mark. She remembered asking about it years ago, hearing the boy explain that he was born with it, that it was like a star on his skin. The floor seemed to disappear from under her feet. Grace sat down in the nearest armchair, still holding the photograph, trying to organize the thoughts that were tumbling through her mind. If that boy in the photo was really who she thought he was, then she was looking at a photograph of little Daniel, her best friend for years at the orphanage. The Daniel who protected her from the older boys, who shared his lunch when she forgot hers, who drew constantly always the same pictures of a family, he swore was real, although everyone thought it was just the imagination of a traumatized child. But if Daniel was in that photo as one of the twins, and if Arthur Kensington was the other twin in the photos, it meant that her employer had a brother everyone was unaware of. A brother who had somehow ended up in the same orphanage as her. A brother who was supposedly alive, or at least had been until she lost contact with him when she turned 16 and left the orphanage. "Grace, are you all right?" Mrs. Beatrice's voice brought her back to reality. The housekeeper was standing at the study door watching her with concern. "You're pale. Did something happen?" Grace stood up quickly, nearly dropping the photograph she was still holding. I'm sorry. The door was open, and I thought," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "These photos, are they of Mr. Arthur as a child?" Mrs. Beatrice entered the study, gently taking the frame from Grace's hands. "Yes, him and his twin brother. A terrible tragedy. The boy disappeared when they were only 4 during a family outing at the Lake District. They never found the body, but it was ruled a drowning. Mr. Arthur never completely got over that loss. That's why he keeps these photos here. It's his way of keeping his brother's memory alive." Grace felt her legs weaken again. "Which one disappeared?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Which of the 2 boys?" "The one with the birthmark on his neck," Mrs. Beatrice replied, pointing to the photo. "I always thought that Mark made it easy to tell them apart, even though they were identical. Why do you ask?" Grace opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How could she explain the impossible? How could she say that she had just recognized the boy supposedly dead for nearly 30 years, that this boy had grown up beside her in an orphanage, that she knew his nightmares, his hopes, his obsessive drawings of a family he insisted was real? "Nothing, just curious," she finally managed to murmur, but her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "I'm sorry for coming in without permission." "It's all right, dear, but it's best you leave now. Mr. Arthur doesn't like anyone touching things in his study. Come on, there's still work to be done. In the kitchen." Grace followed Mrs. Beatrice like an automaton, her brain working frantically. She had to be sure before saying anything. She couldn't just walk in and drop a bombshell like that into the life of a man who had already suffered so much. But if her suspicions were correct, if the Daniel from the orphanage was really Arthur Kensington's lost brother, then she held information that could completely change the life of that shattered family. Information that could bring back something everyone thought was lost forever, or it could open wounds so deep they would never close again. Grace didn't know what the outcome would be, but a certainty grew inside her like an unquenchable flame, and she knew she had to find out the truth, whatever the cost. Grace barely slept that first night. She tossed and turned in the narrow bed, her mind replaying the images from those photographs over and over. Every detail came back with frightening clarity. The birthmark, that small dark mark shaped like a star just below his right ear. She remembered so vividly Daniel showing her that mark, explaining that his adoptive parents said it was special, that it made him unique even though he was a twin. When the alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, Grace had been awake for hours. She got up, took a cold shower to fully awaken, and went down to the kitchen wearing her impeccably ironed uniform. Mrs. Beatrice was already there preparing the household's breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had performed that routine for years. "Did you sleep well?" the housekeeper asked, as she placed fresh rolls in a basket lined with a linen napkin. "Yes," Grace lied, putting on her apron and starting to help with the preparations. "The house is very quiet, peaceful." Mrs. Beatrice smiled sadly. "It used to be different, you know. When Mrs. Eleanor was still with us, there was music in the morning, laughter, conversation. Now it's as if the whole house is in permanent mourning." Grace felt a pang in her chest. "How long have you worked here?" 15 years, the housekeeper replied with pride. "I've been with Mr. Arthur since he bought this house, right after opening his first restaurant. I saw him meet Eleanor, get married, bring little Lily home for the first time. Those were wonderful years. And then, that terrible accident changed everything." Grace wanted to ask more about the accident that took her employer's wife, but she realized it would be too intrusive for only her second day of work. Instead, she focused on setting the breakfast table in the dining room, arranging each item with the care she had learned in previous jobs. Arthur Kensington came down punctually at 7 o'clock, wearing a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Grace earned in 6 months. He greeted Mrs. Beatrice with a nod, and then his eyes fell on Grace for the first time. She felt the impact of that gaze, dark eyes that carried a deep sadness but also an unshakable willpower. "You must be the new staff member," he said, extending his hand. "Arthur Kensington, welcome." "Grace Holloway, sir," she replied, shaking his firm hand and feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Thank you for the opportunity." Arthur studied her face for a moment, and Grace wondered if he saw something familiar in her, some shadow of the shared past she carried like a secret. But then he simply nodded and sat down at the table, picking up the newspaper Mrs. Beatrice had left, beside his plate. "Is Lily coming down for breakfast?" he asked without looking up from the paper. "I'll try to convince her, sir," the housekeeper replied, with little hope in her voice. Grace watched Arthur eat his breakfast in silence, the tension visible in every line of his body. He ate mechanically, without pleasure, like someone who ate only because he needed to keep functioning. When he finished, he stood up, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the door. "I'll be at the restaurant until 7 this evening," he informed them. "If Lily needs anything, you can call. My mobile." After he left, the house seemed even quieter. Grace and Mrs. Beatrice were clearing the table when they heard light footsteps on the stairs. A small girl appeared at the entrance to the dining room, her brown hair messy, her enormous eyes fixed on the floor. She wore unicorn pajamas and was dragging a worn-out stuffed rabbit by its ear. "Good morning, Lily," Mrs. Beatrice said in a soft voice. "I'm so glad you came down. Come have breakfast with us." The girl didn't answer. She just stood there, motionless as a statue, her eyes avoiding any direct contact. Grace's heart ached seeing this young child carrying such a heavy burden. She remembered herself at that age, newly arrived at the orphanage, scared, unable to express the pain she felt. Grace approached slowly, crouching down to be at the girl's level. "Hello, Lily," she said gently. "My name is Grace. I also loved rabbits when I was your age. Does yours have a name?" The girl clutched the toy to her chest, but didn't speak. Her eyes, however, flickered towards Grace before returning to the floor. Mrs. Beatrice sighed. "She doesn't speak, dear. We've tried everything. Therapists, doctors, child trauma specialists. Nothing works. It's as if she's decided the world doesn't deserve to hear her voice." "That's all right," Grace replied, still crouching. "Sometimes words aren't necessary, are they, Lily? Can I show you something?" Lily didn't respond, but she also didn't run away. Grace took that as a good sign. She took a paper napkin from the table and a pen that was in her apron pocket. Her hands moved with practiced skill, lines she had perfected over years in the orphanage. When drawing was the only way to express emotions she had no words for. She began to draw quickly, simple but effective strokes, creating the figure of a hopping rabbit surrounded by wildflowers. She added butterflies around it, a smiling sun in the corner, small details she knew children loved. When she finished, she held out the drawing to Lily carefully, as if offering something precious. "For you and your rabbit friend," Grace said with a genuine smile. They look like they need a beautiful garden to play in, don't you think? The girl looked at the drawing, then at Grace, and for the first time since she had come downstairs, something seemed to stir behind those enormous eyes. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but it was something. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps even interest, or maybe the beginning of a fragile but real connection. Lily took the drawing gently, her small hands trembling slightly, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She studied every detail with an attention that was beyond her years, her fingers tracing the lines of the rabbit, the flowers, the butterflies. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Lily looked directly into Grace's eyes, and in that gaze there was recognition, a silent understanding, between two souls who knew the pain of isolation, of loss, of the fear of connecting again. Then the girl clutched the drawing to her chest and ran back to her room, her footsteps echoing on the marble staircase. "I've never seen her do that," Mrs. Beatrice murmured, impressed, discreetly wiping away a tear that had escaped. She usually completely ignores any attempt to approach her. The therapists tried toys, games, modern techniques. Nothing worked like your simple gesture. Grace stood up, brushing her knee, feeling a mix of hope and responsibility weigh on her shoulders. "It's just small steps," she said modestly. "Hurt children need time and patience. They need to feel they can trust again, that the world isn't just pain and loss. I learned that the hard way." "You have a way with her," the housekeeper observed, gently touching Grace's arm in a motherly gesture that reminded her of the kind staff at the orphanage who tried to compensate for the lack of family. "Have you worked with children before? Do you have a degree in education or psychology?" Grace hesitated, always cautious about sharing too much of her past. But there was something in Mrs. Beatrice's open expression that made her feel safe. "I grew up in an orphanage," she finally said, the words coming out more easily than she expected. "From 5 to 16. I learned early on that sometimes small gestures are more important than big words, that constant presence is worth more than empty promises, that wounded children need someone who is simply there, without judgment, without rushing, just offering unconditional love." Mrs. Beatrice gently touched her shoulder in a maternal gesture. "Then you understand. This girl suffers so much and no one can reach her." For the rest of the morning, Grace performed her tasks efficiently, but her mind kept returning to those photographs in the study. She needed to see the photos again, to be absolutely sure before doing anything. She couldn't just approach Arthur and say she thought she knew his supposedly dead brother. She needed proof, concrete details that confirmed her suspicions. The opportunity arose late in the afternoon. Arthur had called to say he would be home late. Mrs. Beatrice had gone out to do the grocery shopping, and Lily was with her private tutor in her room. Grace found herself alone on the ground floor, the study, just a few steps away. Her heart pounded as she turned the doorknob. The door was unlocked again. Grace entered quickly, closing the door behind her. She approached the fireplace, the photographs that had disturbed her sleep all night. This time she examined each one with meticulous attention. She picked up the largest frame, the one showing the twin boys at 4 years old. She studied every detail of the face of the boy with the birthmark. His eyes were slightly lighter than his brother's, a softer shade of brown. His left ear was a little more prominent, small details that only someone who had spent years observing that face would notice. Grace closed her eyes and let the memories flood back without resistance. Daniel in the orphanage cafeteria, always sitting on her left side because he said he could protect her better from the other boys that way. Daniel drawing obsessively during classes, always the same themes: a large house, a man cooking, a boy who looked just like him. Daniel telling stories about his real family, insisting he had a twin brother, that he had been separated from him by some terrible mistake. Everyone thought it was fantasy, the mind of a traumatized child creating an alternate reality to cope with abandonment. But what if it wasn't fantasy? What if Daniel had been telling the truth all along? Grace opened her eyes and looked at the photograph again. Yes, that was Daniel. She was sure of it now. The face was the same, just younger, chubbier, but unmistakably the same. The implications of this discovery made her dizzy. If Daniel was Arthur's twin brother, then he hadn't died at the lake. He had been kidnapped, lost, somehow ending up in the orphanage with a false identity. She heard the sound of the front door opening. Mrs. Beatrice was back from the shops. Grace quickly put the photograph back in its place and left the study, her heart racing. She had to tell Arthur, but how? How to start such a conversation? How to explain that the brother he had mourned for decades might be alive somewhere? She spent the rest of the day in a state of constant nervousness, making simple mistakes, dropping things, unable to concentrate. When Arthur finally arrived at 9 that night, Grace made a decision. She would wait until she knew him better, until she had earned his trust. She couldn't just drop this bombshell in a stranger's lap. She needed the right moment, the right words. That night, before falling asleep, Grace took a sheet of paper and began to write down everything she remembered about Daniel. The approximate date he arrived at the orphanage, his age at the time, the stories he told, the drawings he made. Every detail could be important. Every memory could be the missing piece to the impossible puzzle her life had just become. In the following days, Grace established a quiet routine in the house. She worked with absolute dedication, ensuring every corner was spotless. But her real focus was on observing, on learning about this broken family, on looking for the right moment to reveal what she knew, and on winning the trust of little Lily, that wounded girl who touched her heart in ways she couldn't fully explain. 3 weeks had passed since Grace started working at the Kensington mansion, 3 weeks in which she had perfected every detail of her tasks, earned Mrs. Beatrice's respect, and most importantly, begun to build a fragile but real bridge to little Lily. All through small gestures and unspoken words, every morning Grace left a different drawing under Lily's bedroom door, a little bird in a tree, a rainbow over a house, colourful flowers in a garden, and every morning when she went to clean the hallway, the drawing was gone, kept by the girl in some secret place in her room. Lily still wasn't speaking, but her eyes now sought out Grace when she passed, a tiny progress that filled the housekeeper's heart with hope. Arthur had also begun to notice the subtle changes in his daughter. During breakfast, he would watch Lily with a mixture of surprise and poorly disguised gratitude. The girl now regularly came down for meals, still silent but present, and she always carried her stuffed rabbit and a small stack of Grace's drawings with her. On a rainy Thursday, while Grace was cleaning the library on the first floor, Arthur came in looking for a book. It was the first time they had been alone in the same room beyond the quick morning greetings. "Grace," he began, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for what you've been doing for Lily. I know you weren't hired for this, but the change in her since you arrived is visible. It's small, but it's real." Grace stopped dusting the shelves and turned to face him. "She's a special girl, Mr. Arthur. She just needs time, and someone who understands that not all communication requires words." Arthur nodded, leaning against the reading table. "You said you grew up in an orphanage. That must have been difficult." "It was," Grace admitted, feeling that perhaps this was the moment she had been waiting for weeks. "But it also taught me to value the small connections, the true friendships. I had a particularly close friend there, a boy who arrived when I was 6. He became my best friend, my protector." Arthur watched her with genuine interest. "Do you still keep in touch?" Grace took a deep breath. This was her chance. "No. We lost contact when I turned 16 and left the orphanage, but I think of him often, especially since I came to work here." "Why?" Arthur asked, a frown of confusion appearing on his forehead. Grace walked closer to him, her hands trembling slightly. "May I ask you a personal question, Mr. Arthur, about your brother?" Arthur's expression changed instantly, a shadow crossing, his face like a cloud blocking the sun. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened, and Grace saw the flash of old pain in his eyes. "My brother?" he asked, his voice too controlled, the kind of control that comes from years of practicing hiding deep emotions. "How do you know about him?" "Mrs. Beatrice told me," Grace replied quickly, not wanting to cause further discomfort. "About the accident at the lake when you were children, about how he disappeared and was never found. She mentioned he had a birthmark on his neck, didn't he?" Arthur tensed even more, if that was possible. His breathing became shallower, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Yes," he said finally, his voice hoarse. A small mark on the right side, just below his ear. It looked like a star, my mother used to say. It was the only sure way to tell us apart when we were very young, before our personalities started to form. Why are you asking this, Grace? Grace felt tears burn her eyes, years of memories returning in overwhelming waves. Because I knew a boy at the orphanage who had the exact same mark, she said, her voice choked, each word coming out with difficulty. A boy who told stories about having a twin brother, about being separated from his family when he was very young, about a big house and a father who loved to cook. A boy who drew obsessively, always the same themes. A family he swore was real, no matter how many times the adults told him it was just the imagination of a traumatized child. Arthur's face paled visibly, all the color draining until his lips were white. He grabbed the back of the nearest chair with such force that his knuckles turned white. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My brother drowned when he was 4. The body was never found, but it was ruled as such. Are you saying he was alive all this time? That he was in an orphanage?" "Was his body ever found?" Grace asked gently. "No, but—" Arthur paused, processing. "Are you suggesting that—" "I'm saying that the boy I knew at the orphanage was named Daniel. He had a birthmark identical to your brother's. He talked about having a twin brother. He drew a family that everyone thought was imaginary, but what if it wasn't? What if he was drawing memories?" Arthur gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white with force. "This is impossible. You're telling me my brother, who disappeared almost 30 years ago, was alive in an orphanage this whole time?" "I'm saying it's possible," Grace replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I saw the photographs in your study. I recognized that face, those eyes. I spent years beside that boy, Mr. Arthur. I knew every detail of his face, every mark, every expression, and he is identical to the boy in your photographs." Arthur let go of the chair and began to pace, his breathing heavy. "Where is he now? Do you know where to find him?" Grace shook her head sadly. "No. He ran away from the orphanage when he was 16. He said he was going to find his real family. I never heard from him again." Arthur ran his hands over his face, clearly trying to process information that challenged everything he had believed for decades. "If what you're saying is true, if my brother was alive all this time, then what happened at that lake? How did he end up in an orphanage?" "That's the question we need to answer," Grace said firmly. "But first, you need to be sure I'm not mistaken. I have details about Daniel that only someone very close would know. I can tell you everything, every memory, every story he told." Arthur looked at her with an intensity Grace had never seen before. "Tell me everything, every detail. Don't leave anything out." They sat down, and Grace began to speak. She told him about the day Daniel arrived at the orphanage, thin and scared, talking about parents who had died in an accident. She told him about the obsessive drawings, always showing 2 identical boys playing together. She told him about the nights Daniel would wake up screaming, talking about water, about sinking, about hands pulling him down. She told him about the birthmark he proudly showed, saying it made him special. Grace described every physical detail she remembered: the slightly more prominent left ear, a small scar on his eyebrow from a childhood fall, the way Daniel would wrinkle his nose when he was concentrating, the way he bit his lower lip when he was nervous. With each detail, Arthur grew paler, more tense, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. His entire body was rigid, every muscle tensed, as if preparing for a blow. His breath came in short, irregular bursts, and Grace could see the conflict casting shadows on his face. Part of him wanted to believe, desperately wanted it to be true, that the brother he had mourned for decades was alive somewhere. But another part, the rational part shaped by years of pain and forced acceptance, resisted the hope because hope meant the possibility of new disappointment, and he wasn't sure he could survive another loss of that magnitude. Finally, he broke the heavy silence that had fallen over them like a suffocating blanket. "The scar on his eyebrow, how did he get it?" "Daniel told me he fell off a chair trying to reach biscuits on a high shelf," Grace replied. "He said he was 3 when it happened." Arthur let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That's exactly how it happened. We were both trying to get hidden biscuits. I encouraged him to climb up. He fell and hit his eyebrow on the corner of the table. My mother was furious with me. "So you believe me?" Grace asked softly. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the falling rain. "I don't know what to believe. This defies everything I thought I knew for almost 30 years, but the details you know that they're too specific to be a coincidence. I need to investigate this. I need to find out what really happened at that lake." Grace stood up too. "I can help. I have the name of the orphanage, approximate dates, any information that might be useful." Arthur turned to her, unshed tears glistening in his eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why tell me?" "Because Daniel was my best friend during the hardest years of my life," Grace answered honestly. "Because he deserves to be found. And because you deserve to know the truth about what happened to your brother." Arthur extended his hand, and for the first time since they met, shook Grace's hand with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know if this will lead anywhere, but thank you for giving me hope for something I thought was lost forever." In the following days, Arthur hired a private investigator, a man named Marcus Thorne, with an impeccable reputation in complex cases. Grace spent hours giving her statement, recalling every detail about Daniel, providing dates, names of orphanage staff, any information that could help. The investigator started with the official records, the death certificate of the child supposedly drowned at the lake, the police reports of the disappearance, the records of St. Anthony's Orphanage. Each document was examined meticulously, looking for inconsistencies, clues, anything that didn't fit perfectly. While the investigation progressed, life in the mansion continued. Grace maintained her work routine, but now there was a different connection between her and Arthur. No longer just employer and employee, but two people united by a shared mystery, by a fragile hope of discovering an impossible truth. And Lily, little Lily, watched everything with her large, silent eyes. The girl had started to follow Grace around the house, always a few steps away, never too close but never too far. It was as if she sensed that something important was happening, something that could change their lives forever. 2 weeks after the first meeting with the investigator Marcus Thorne, Arthur called a second meeting in his study. Grace was invited. Her to attend, acknowledging that she was a key piece in the puzzle they were beginning to assemble. Mrs. Beatrice was responsible for looking after Lily during the conversation. Marcus was a man in his 50s, with grey hair and reading glasses hanging from his shirt pocket. He had that meticulous air of someone who let no detail go unnoticed. He spread several documents on the mahogany desk, his grave expression indicating that the news would not be simple. "Mr. Kensington," he began in a professional voice, "I've found something disturbing. Your brother's death certificate has significant inconsistencies. The date recorded does not match the date of the disappearance. There are signatures of witnesses who, upon investigation, were found to have passed away years before the events described." Arthur leaned over the table, his face tense. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone forged this death certificate," Marcus replied gravely. "And there's more. The police reports from the time of the disappearance were, conveniently, lost in a fire at the station's archive 15 years ago. Very convenient." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "So Daniel really didn't drown? Someone took him?" Marcus nodded. "I also investigated the records of St. Anthony's Orphanage. I found the file of a boy named Daniel Smith, entry registered at 6 years of age. The official story says his adoptive parents died in a car accident, and the child was sent to the orphanage. But when I checked on these adoptive parents, Peter and Martha Smith, I discovered something interesting. The investigator pulled out another document. This couple did exist, and they did lose their lives in an accident when the child was 6. But there's a problem. They never officially adopted any child. There is no legal paperwork, no registered adoption process, and neighbors reported that the couple suddenly appeared with a young boy, saying they had adopted him informally." Arthur was pale. "Are you saying my brother was sold to this couple?" "It's the most likely hypothesis," Marcus confirmed. "Illegal adoption. The couple probably couldn't adopt through legal means and paid someone to get them a child. When they passed away, The child was sent to the orphanage with forged documents, a new identity. But who would do that? Grace asked, her voice trembling. Who would kidnap a 4-year-old child and sell him? Marcus gathered the papers carefully, organizing them into neat piles on the table. That's the hardest part to investigate, he admitted, taking off his glasses and cleaning them with a handkerchief from his pocket. It happened almost 30 years ago. Many key witnesses have passed away. Records have been lost or destroyed. Memories have faded with time. But there's a suspicious pattern I can't ignore. 3 people who were at the lake that day and could have seen something relevant, something that could have changed the whole investigation at the time, had tragic ends in the following years. One in a traffic accident supposedly caused by brake failure, never fully explained. Another in a house fire that firefighters found strangely accelerated, but with no definitive proof of foul play. A third in a fatal fall from a building, ruled a suicide, despite the family swearing he had no depressive tendencies. It could be a coincidence, of course, but my 20 years of experience in this business tells me it's not. This has all the hallmarks of a systematic cover-up, planned and executed by someone with considerable resources and connections. Arthur stood up abruptly, slamming his fist on the table. Someone covered up this crime for all these years. Someone ensured the evidence disappeared, that the witnesses didn't talk. We need to find out who. I'm working on it, Marcus assured him, but I need you to understand that this could take time and that some truths can be painful. We don't always find what we expect to find. I don't care, Arthur said with determination. I want the truth, whatever it may be. My brother deserves that. My family deserves that. In the days following that meeting, Arthur was different, more distant, lost in dark thoughts. Grace watched with concern as he spent hours locked in his study, reviewing documents, making calls, talking to the investigator. The discovery that his brother's disappearance was not an accident, but a calculated crime, weighed on him like a stone. It was during this turbulent period that Grace realized she needed to intensify her efforts with Lily. The girl felt the tension that permeated the house, and her fragile progress was in danger of regressing. Grace decided to try something different. On a Saturday afternoon, while Arthur was once again locked in his study, Grace found Lily sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window with that distant expression that broke hearts. Grace approached slowly, sitting on the floor next to the armchair where the girl was. "You know, Lily," Grace began softly, "when I was your age, I also spent a lot of time being quiet, looking out the window. Do you know why?" Lily didn't answer, but her eyes moved slightly towards Grace. "It was because I was too scared to talk," Grace continued. "I was afraid that if I said the wrong things, people would leave. I was afraid my words would hurt someone. So I stayed quiet, keeping everything inside." Grace took a sheet of paper and colored pencils she had brought with her. "But then I discovered there were other ways to talk. Can I show you?" She began to draw, not something cute and simple like the drawings she left under Lily's door, but something different. She drew a girl alone in a dark room. Then she drew the same girl in a sunny garden surrounded by flowers, the two versions side by side. "Sometimes we feel like this girl here," Grace said, pointing to the dark drawing. "Alone, scared, trapped in the dark. But there's a garden waiting for us out here, if we have the courage to leave." Lily took the paper, studying the drawings intently. Then, for the first time since Grace had known her, the girl picked up a colored pencil. She began to draw in the corner of the paper, hesitant strokes at first, then firmer. She drew a small figure, a girl holding hands with a larger figure. Both figures had smiles. Grace felt tears well up in her eyes. "That's beautiful, Lily. Is it you and your mum?" Lily shook her head. Then she pointed to the small figure, then to herself. She pointed to the larger figure, and with a slow, deliberate movement, pointed to Grace. Grace's heart leaped. She understood. In Lily's drawing, she wasn't just another adult taking care of her. She was someone important, someone special, someone the girl was beginning to trust. "Can I keep this drawing?" Grace asked, her voice choked. "It's very special to me." Lily nodded, a small but definitive movement. And then something happened that no one expected. The girl slipped off the armchair and sat on the floor next to Grace, their bodies almost touching. She said nothing, made no dramatic gesture, but that physical proximity was a monumental breakthrough for a child who had spent a year avoiding human contact. They stayed like that for a long time, sitting side by side on the living room floor, drawing together in silence. Lily created simple but revealing images, inner worlds she couldn't express with words. Grace drew beside her, offering silent companionship, a constant presence. When Arthur finally came out of his study hours later, he found them still there. He stopped at the entrance to the room, observing the scene with an expression Grace couldn't quite decipher. There was surprise, certainly, but also something more. Gratitude, perhaps, or hope, or both. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Arthur called Grace for a chat. They sat on the back terrace, the cool night air carrying the scent of jasmine growing along the wall. "You have a gift with her," Arthur said, his voice low. "In a few months you've achieved what a team of therapists couldn't in a year." "It's not a gift," Grace replied. "It's empathy. I understand what she's feeling because I've felt the same. The loneliness, the fear, the feeling that the world is too dangerous a place to open your heart." Arthur looked at her with curiosity. "You overcame it. How?" Grace thought for a moment. "I was lucky to find people who didn't give up on me. People who understood that healing takes time, that there are no shortcuts to processing pain. Daniel was one of those people. He taught me that even in the darkest places we can find light if we look hard enough." "I hope we can find him," Arthur said fervently. "I hope that after all these years he's still out there, looking for his way back home." "We will find him," Grace replied with conviction. "I'm sure of it." In the following days, a new routine was established in the house. Arthur continued his investigation with Marcus, but now he took regular breaks to spend time with Lily. Grace continued her cleaning work, but dedicated every free minute to the girl. Slowly, Lily began to emerge from the protective shell she had built around herself. The girl still wasn't talking, but she began to communicate through drawings and gestures. She would point to things she wanted, shake her head for yes or no, smile when she was happy. They were small but significant steps, and with each small victory, Arthur seemed to regain a little of the light he had lost when his wife passed away. Grace watched it all with a heart torn between hope and fear. Hope that this broken family could rebuild itself. Fear that the revelations about the past could bring more pain than healing. But she carried on day after day doing what she knew best, offering a constant presence and unconditional love to those who needed it, as much as she once had. The first time Grace saw Isabella Vance was on a Tuesday afternoon, when a red convertible BMW pulled up in front of the mansion with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The woman who stepped out of the car was stunning in a calculated way, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders, a designer dress that probably cost more than Grace earned in 3 months. High heels clicked on the stone path like a declaration of war. Grace was watering the plants on the veranda when Isabella walked past her without even a glance of recognition, as if the staff were part of the furniture, invisible and irrelevant. She rang the doorbell impatiently, tapping her foot as she waited. Mrs. Beatrice answered the door, and Grace noticed the immediate tension in the housekeeper's body. "Miss Vance," she said with icy formality, "Mr. Arthur wasn't expecting you today." "I don't need an invitation to visit my fiancé," Isabella replied with a smile as sharp as glass. "Ex-fiancé," Mrs. Beatrice corrected firmly. "Shall I let him know you're here?" Isabella was already walking in, gently pushing the housekeeper aside. "I'll find him myself, thank you." Grace watched the scene with growing discomfort. There was something predatory in the way this woman moved through the house, as if she still owned the place, as if time and change didn't apply to her. Arthur came out of his study upon hearing the commotion, his expression quickly shifting from surprise to restrained irritation. "Isabella, what are you doing here?" "I came to see how you are, darling," she replied with artificial sweetness, moving in to kiss his cheek. Arthur subtly recoiled, avoiding the contact. "We haven't spoken properly in weeks." "We broke up over a year ago, Isabella. There's nothing for us to talk about." Isabella pouted as if he were a stubborn child. You were grieving, you weren't thinking clearly. But it's time to move on, Arthur. And who better to help you with that than someone who already knows you and loves you? Grace, still on the veranda, couldn't help but overhear the conversation. She felt a strange pang in her chest, something that took a moment to identify. Jealousy? No, it couldn't be that. She was just the employee. Arthur was her employer. There was nothing between them but a connection based on a shared mystery. But still, seeing this woman staking a claim on Arthur's life bothered her in ways she couldn't rationally explain. "Isabella, you need to leave," Arthur said firmly. "I'm not having this conversation again." But Isabella was not the type to take no for an answer. She walked into the living room, settling onto the sofa as if she planned to stay. "At least offer me a coffee. We can talk like civilized adults." Arthur sighed, recognizing it would be easier to let her talk and leave than to try to force her out. "Mrs. Beatrice, please." The housekeeper went to the kitchen with an expression that made it clear what she thought of the visit. Grace, feeling like an intruder but unable to move away, continued her tasks on the veranda, her ears tuned to every word coming from the living room. "I heard you hired a new staff member," Isabella commented with false casualness. "Mrs. Beatrice told me she's been very good with Lily." Grace noticed the venom hidden in those words, the way Isabella pronounced new staff member with thinly veiled disdain. "Grace has been excellent," Arthur replied. "Lily has responded better to her than to any therapist." "How convenient," Isabella murmured, taking a sip of the coffee Mrs. Beatrice had brought. An employee who suddenly becomes indispensable, winning over the rich employer's daughter. "I hope you're being cautious, Arthur." "What are you implying?" Arthur's voice had a warning tone. "Nothing, darling. Just that women in vulnerable positions sometimes see opportunities where others would only see a job. It's important to know the background of the people you let into your home, especially near your daughter." Grace's blood ran cold. This woman was planting seeds of doubt, cruel insinuations disguised as concern. And the worst part was that Grace had a past that could easily be twisted, that false accusation of theft from her previous job, the case dismissed but never completely wiped from her record. "I did a full background check on Grace before hiring her," Arthur said coldly. "Your concern is unnecessary and, frankly, inappropriate." Isabella placed her coffee cup on the small table with a deliberate click. "If you say so, but promise me you'll be careful, Arthur. You're a good man, perhaps too good. People take advantage of that." Isabella stood to leave, but not before casting one last calculated glance in Grace's direction, who pretended to be busy with the plants. That look said it all. It was a silent declaration of war, a warning that Grace was being watched, evaluated, judged. After Isabella left, Grace continued her work, trying to ignore the discomfort that had settled in her chest. But at night, as she prepared for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Isabella Vance was clearly a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted, and what she wanted was Arthur back. Grace represented an obstacle, however unintentional, in that plan. The following days brought news from the investigation that made everyone temporarily forget Isabella's visit. Marcus Thorne appeared at the mansion with documents that proved his darkest suspicions. The investigation had revealed a complex web of lies and cover-ups. "I found the name of the doctor who signed the fake death certificate," Marcus explained, spreading papers on the study table. "Dr. Henry Travers. He had a private practice and was known for providing questionable documentation for a fee. He lost his license 20 years ago for unethical practices and passed away 10 years ago. But before that, he left a trail." Arthur examined the documents with trembling hands. "A trail that leads where?" "To a couple, Peter and Martha Smith, the same ones who raised your brother as their adopted son. I found old bank records showing a large payment made by the couple to Dr. Travers just days after your brother's disappearance. £50,000, a fortune back then." "So they paid to have my brother," Arthur said, his voice strangled. "They paid for someone to kidnap him." "It's the most logical conclusion," Marcus confirmed. "But there's still a piece missing from this puzzle. Who actually carried out the kidnapping at the lake? The Smiths were a middle-class couple. They likely didn't have the criminal connections to do something like that themselves." Someone connected them with the right person. And that person covered their tracks by killing witnesses, Grace added with a shiver. Marcus nodded grimly. Exactly. Which means we're dealing with someone dangerous, or at least we were at the time. They may have disappeared, moved away, even passed on, but the records are there, waiting to be discovered. How long? Arthur asked. How long until we have real answers? A few weeks, maybe months. I'm following every lead, but this happened a long time ago. Many files have been destroyed, many people are gone, but I won't give up. After Marcus left, Arthur remained alone, in his study for hours. Grace respected his space, but her heart ached for him. Discovering that his brother's disappearance was not an accident, but a calculated and covered-up crime, was a brutal truth to process. It was Lily who finally pulled him out of that spiral of dark thoughts. The girl came downstairs near dinner time, holding a new drawing. She didn't go to her father as she normally would, but went to Grace in the kitchen, pulling her hand and leading her to the study where Arthur was. Grace knocked on the door gently. "Mr. Arthur, Lily wants to show you something." Arthur looked up, his eyes red from emotional exhaustion and sleepless nights spent reviewing documents and theories. Lily entered timidly, each step measured and careful, as if the floor might crack beneath her feet. She held out the drawing to her father with hands that trembled slightly. It was a simple but profoundly powerful image in its symbolism. 3 figures holding hands, forming a human chain of connection and love. A tall, strong man in the center, a small girl holding one of his hands, and on the other side a woman with wavy hair who clearly represented Grace. Above them a large yellow sun shone with rays that seemed to embrace the 3 figures, and around them were flowers, birds, butterflies, everything that represented life, growth, hope. Arthur took the drawing with trembling hands, studying each line. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, his voice choked. "Is this the 3 of us?" Lily nodded, then did something that shocked both Grace and Arthur. The girl approached her father and hugged him, holding him tightly. And then, in a small, hesitant voice that hadn't been heard in over a year, she whispered a single word. "Daddy." Arthur completely broke down, all the barriers he had kept up for that year of grief and pain crumbling at once. He hugged his daughter with a desperate but careful strength, as if she were made of glass and might break at any moment. Tears finally fell freely down his face, without shame or any attempt to hide them, wetting Lily's hair as he held her, as if he would never let go. Sobs shook his entire body, years of repressed emotions finally finding release in that embrace. Grace discreetly backed away, giving them privacy for this precious moment that belonged only to them, but not before feeling her own tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She leaned against the wall in the hallway outside the study, covering her mouth with her hands to muffle the sounds of her own emotion, her body trembling with the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. Lily had spoken. After months of self-imposed silence, of refusing to connect with the world through words, the girl had found her voice again and had chosen to use it to call for her father. It was a miracle, small in scale but profound in meaning, a clear and unequivocal sign that healing was possible even after the worst wounds, that love could rebuild what tragedy had destroyed. That night, Grace lay in her bed, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Hope for Lily's progress, concern over the investigation's revelations, a lingering unease from Isabella's visit, but above all a growing sense that her life was becoming intertwined with this family's in ways she had never anticipated. It was no longer just a job. It was something deeper, more significant, more frightening. It was belonging. The word Lily had spoken that night turned into several. They were still few, still, came with hesitation, but they were real words, real connections to the world around her. Grace became Auntie Grace. Mrs. Beatrice became Granny B, a nickname the housekeeper accepted with tears of joy. The stuffed rabbit was finally given a name, Fluffy, because Lily said he was as soft as snowflakes. Arthur documented every bit of progress with the care of someone who feared waking up to find it was all a dream. He hired a new therapist, Dr. Camille, who worked with Grace to create an environment where Lily felt safe to express herself. The sessions took place 3 times a week, and Grace was always present, sitting in a corner, offering her comforting presence. It was during one of these sessions, on a sunny Thursday morning, that Arthur's phone rang urgently. He was at home that day, working in his study while monitoring Lily's session upstairs. He answered, expecting a call about the restaurant, but Marcus Thorne's voice on the other end had a different energy. "Mr. Kensington, I need you to come to my office. I found something important." Arthur quickly excused himself and drove to central London, where Marcus kept his private office in a discreet, commercial building. The investigator was waiting for him with a thick folder of documents and an expression that mixed excitement and apprehension. "I managed to access the old medical records from the hospital where your brother should have been admitted if he had really drowned," Marcus began. "There's no record of a child matching your brother's description on that day or the following days. Nothing. It's as if he was never there." "But my parents were told the body wasn't found," Arthur argued. "Exactly," Marcus agreed, "and that's where the story starts to fall apart. I spoke with a retired diver who took part in the search at the lake back then. He told me the search was called off after just 2 days, which is highly unusual. Normally, in cases of missing children, the search extends for at least a week." Arthur sat down, processing the information. "Someone wanted them to stop looking." "Yes," Marcus confirmed, "and there's more. Investigating the staff who were at the lake that day, I found the name of a lifeguard, Augustus Miles. He was the one who supposedly saw the child fall into the water. 3 years after the incident, Augustus died in a house fire. The investigation at the time concluded it was accidental, a carelessly discarded cigarette. But there's an interesting detail. A week before he died, Augustus made a large deposit into a bank account, £20,000 in cash. He was paid to lie and then silenced permanently," Arthur whispered, horror growing in his voice. "It's the most likely theory," Marcus agreed. "But here's the part that will really shock you. I managed to trace the origin of that deposit. It took weeks of investigation following old bank trails, but I finally found it. The money came from a corporate account of a law firm that closed down 20 years ago." "And?" Arthur pressed. Marcus slid a photograph across the table. "Do you recognize this person?" Arthur picked up the photo, and his blood ran cold. It was an old, slightly faded image, but the face was unmistakable. A middle-aged man, a confident smile, an expensive suit. Next to him, a young blonde woman. A woman Arthur knew very well. "That's Isabella's father," Arthur said, his voice strangled. "Dr. Edmund Vance. He was a lawyer, had a big firm, but what does he have to do with this?" "Edmund. Vance wasn't just a lawyer," Marcus explained grimly, flipping through more documents he had brought. "He had shady connections that stretched across the country. He facilitated illegal adoptions for wealthy, desperate clients who couldn't or wouldn't go through the proper legal process. He charged fortunes for it, had a whole network of people involved. Doctors who forged documents, public officials who turned a blind eye, even people who, well, procured children when needed. The Smith couple were among his clients. Edmund connected them with people who could get them a child no matter how. And when the job was done, he made sure all tracks were erased, all loose ends were tied up." Arthur dropped the photograph as if it were burning his hands. "No, that can't be right. Isabella's father organized my brother's kidnapping." "I don't have definitive proof that he directly orchestrated the kidnapping," Marcus admitted. "But he was definitely involved in the cover-up. It was his firm that paid the lifeguard. It was he who arranged for the false death certificate through Dr. Travers. Edmund Vance was the mastermind behind the entire cleanup operation." Arthur stood up and began pacing, his mind working frantically. "Does Isabella know about this? Was she involved?" "She was only 8 when it happened," Marcus reminded him. "But it's possible she overheard things over the years, that she knows more than she lets on. Edmund passed away 5 years ago, taking many secrets with him. But files don't lie, and I have enough files to prove his involvement." Arthur returned home that afternoon with the crushing weight of all that information on his shoulders, walking like a man carrying the entire world. Each step seemed to require conscious effort. Each breath had to be remembered and deliberately taken. How was he supposed to deal with this devastating information? How could he confront Isabella knowing that her father, the man who sat at their dinner table, who had congratulated him on their engagement, who had made beautiful speeches about family and the future, was involved in the total destruction of his own family? And more importantly, more frighteningly, did Isabella really know nothing, or had she been keeping this terrible secret for all the years they were together, smiling and kissing, and promising love while hiding the crime that linked their families so grotesquely? Grace knew immediately that something was wrong when Arthur arrived home. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he took off his jacket. She followed him to the study discreetly, knocking softly on the door. "Come in," he said in a tired voice. Grace entered and closed the door behind her. "Did something happen with the investigation?" Arthur told her everything. Marcus's findings, Edmund Vance's involvement, the devastating implications of the revelation. Grace listened in silence, her heart aching for him with every word. "What are you going to do?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know," Arthur admitted. "Confronting Isabella seems like the right thing to do, but what if she really knows nothing? Would it be fair to destroy her image of her father because of his crimes?" Grace thought carefully before answering. "I think she deserves to know the truth. We all deserve to know the truth about the people we love, even when that truth hurts. And if she does know something, if she's hiding information that could help find Daniel, then you have a right to know." "You're right," Arthur agreed. "I'll talk to her, but I'll do it carefully, see how she reacts." In the following days, Arthur tried to contact Isabella several times without success. She didn't answer his calls, didn't reply to his messages. It was as if she had purposely disappeared. Meanwhile, life in the mansion continued at its new pace. Lily was thriving. She started attending school again, just half days at first. Grace would take her and pick her up every day, waiting in the schoolyard in case the girl needed her. At first, Lily could barely last an hour without having a panic attack, but gradually she adjusted. She made her first friend, a girl named Laura, who was also quiet and shy. The two would sit together during break time, sharing snacks and drawing. It was Grace who was with Lily on the day she read aloud for the first time in class. The teacher had called, excited, asking for a family member to come and witness the moment. Grace sat at the back of the classroom, silent tears streaming down her face as she listened to Lily read a short text about a rabbit who made new friends. The girl's voice was hesitant but clear, each word a monumental victory. When they got home that afternoon, Grace found Arthur in the living room. He had left the restaurant early, a rare occurrence. There was a tension in his shoulders that Grace recognized immediately. "Isabella finally replied," he said without preamble. "She's coming for dinner tomorrow. She said we need to talk about the future." Grace felt something strange stir in her chest. Discomfort, worry. Or was it what she had been trying to deny for the past few weeks, a feeling she had no right to entertain? "All right," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Do you want me to prepare something special for dinner?" Arthur looked at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "It's not the kind of dinner that requires special preparation, Grace. I'm going to confront her about her father's involvement in my brother's disappearance." Lily, who had overheard the conversation, approached Grace and held her hand. The girl had developed a keen instinct for tension, recognizing when the adults around her were worried. Grace squeezed the small hand, offering silent comfort. "Everything will be fine, Lily," she said, with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "Your daddy is just looking for some important answers." But as she put Lily to bed that night, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Isabella Vance was not the kind of woman who accepted being confronted passively, and if she truly knew something about her father's crimes, if she was involved in some way, she wouldn't let these revelations threaten her goal of winning Arthur back. Grace had seen that calculated look during her previous visit, recognized the danger hiding behind that polished beauty. Isabella was a formidable opponent, and Grace had a feeling the battle was just beginning. A battle in which she herself, without choosing to be, was already deeply involved. Dinner was set for 8 o'clock. Grace spent the day in a state of nervousness she couldn't fully explain. Mrs. Beatrice noticed her agitation and commented that she had never seen her so anxious, not even on her first day of work. Grace made up an excuse about being worried for Lily, but the truth was more complicated than that. Isabella arrived punctually, driving that red convertible that seemed to scream for attention. This time she wore an elegant black dress, discreet, but expensive jewelry and flawless makeup. She was prepared for a battle, even if she didn't know exactly which one yet. Grace watched her from a first-floor window as she walked up the path to the front door, each step calculated, every movement rehearsed. Arthur received her in the living room, politely dismissing Mrs. Beatrice. He wanted privacy for this conversation. Grace retreated to her room but left the door ajar. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the house had a peculiar acoustics, and raised voices traveled easily through the corridors. Initially, the conversation was civil. Isabella talked about her family's business, about social events, about mutual acquaintances. Arthur responded with polite monosyllables, clearly waiting for the right moment to steer the conversation to what really mattered. "Isabella," he said finally, interrupting her story about some charity event, "that's not why I invited you here. I need to ask you some questions about your father." The change in Isabella was instantaneous. The charming mask vanished, replaced by caution. "My father? He passed away 5 years ago, Arthur. Why do you want to talk about him now?" "Because I hired an investigator to find out what really happened to my brother at the lake 30 years ago," Arthur replied, his voice gaining a hardness Grace had never heard before. "And this investigator found disturbing connections to your father's law firm." There was a tense silence. Grace held her breath, waiting for Isabella's response. "I don't know what you're talking about," Isabella said finally, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "My father was a respected lawyer." "Your father facilitated illegal adoptions," Arthur corrected. "He connected desperate couples with people who could get them children no matter how. And in the process of covering up these operations, he paid people to lie, to forge documents, perhaps even to permanently silence witnesses." Isabella stood up abruptly. "That's a ridiculous accusation. My father would never do something like that." "I have documents, Isabella. Bank records, testimonies, connections that can't be a coincidence. Your firm paid the lifeguard who lied about seeing my brother drown. Your father arranged the false death certificate. He was at the center of the entire operation that destroyed my family." Isabella's voice was sharp now, defensive. "Even if that were true, and I'm not admitting it is, what do you want from me?" "I was 8 at the time, Arthur. I was a child." "I want to know if you knew anything," Arthur pressed. "If at any point throughout all the years we were together you heard something, suspected something, and chose not to tell me." Isabella laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Is that what this is all about? You're accusing me of being complicit in something that happened when I was still in primary school. Are you looking for excuses to push me away because your pretty little employee is turning your head?" Grace's blood ran cold. So Isabella had noticed. Noticed what, exactly? Grace wasn't even sure what there was to notice, but apparently Isabella saw something she herself was still trying to deny. "This has nothing to do with Grace," Arthur replied, but there was a hesitation in his voice that did not go unnoticed. "It has everything to do with her," Isabella retorted venomously. "You're so desperate for someone who understands your pain that you've latched onto the first person who showed your daughter a shred of kindness. But do you really know this woman, Arthur? Do you know who she really is?" Grace felt her heart race. "No," she thought. "Please, no." Isabella continued, each word chosen to inflict maximum damage. "I did some investigating of my own into your dear Grace Holloway. Did you know? She has a dismissed theft charge on her record. She was accused of stealing valuable jewelry from a previous employer. The case was dropped for lack of evidence, but that doesn't mean she's innocent. It just means she was smart enough not to leave any." "I already know about that," Arthur said firmly. "Grace told me about that false accusation from the beginning. The previous employer was jealous of her and set her up. Grace proved her innocence." "Oh, yes," Isabella replied sarcastically. "How convenient. All the women who get caught stealing claim they were set up, don't they? And you just believed her without question." "I believed her because I know her character, something you clearly can't comprehend." Isabella picked up her handbag, her eyes glinting with something dangerous. "You're going to regret this, Arthur. You're going to regret choosing some common housekeeper over me, throwing away what we had because of delusions about your brother being alive. But when that woman shows her true colors, when she disappoints you in the way I know she will, don't come crying back to me." She left, slamming the door hard enough to make the pictures on the wall tremble. Grace heard the convertible's engine roar and the tires squeal as it sped out of the driveway. She sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Mrs. Beatrice appeared at her bedroom door a few minutes later. "Are you all right, dear? I heard the commotion." Grace nodded, unable to trust her own voice. The housekeeper came in and sat beside her, putting a motherly arm around her shoulders. "Don't pay any mind to what that woman said," Mrs. Beatrice advised. "Isabella Vance has always been spoiled and vindictive. She doesn't like to lose." "But she's right. About one thing," Grace said in a small voice. "I'm just the employee. I have no right to get involved in Mr. Arthur's family matters." "Nonsense," Mrs. Beatrice replied firmly. "You've become a part of this family in a way Isabella never managed in years of being engaged. Lily loves you. Mr. Arthur trusts you. That's worth more than any title or social standing." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, the conversation she'd overheard playing on a loop in her mind. Isabella wouldn't leave it at that. Grace knew women like her, women who saw the world, as a chess game where they always had to be in control. And now Grace had become a piece on that board, a piece Isabella was determined to remove. The following days were tense. Arthur delved even deeper into the investigation, working with Marcus to track down any additional information that could lead to Daniel. Lily continued her remarkable progress, talking more each day, smiling more, slowly reconnecting with the world around her. And Grace kept to her routine, trying to ignore the growing sense that a storm was approaching. The storm arrived on a Friday night, during a charity gala that Arthur was obliged to attend as one of London's prominent businessmen. Grace wasn't there, of course. Staff weren't invited to such events, but she would hear all about it later, in painful detail. Isabella appeared at the event wearing a scarlet red dress, the kind of outfit designed to command attention. She worked the room like a professional, chatting with the right people, laughing at the appropriate moments, ensuring everyone saw her, that everyone remembered she had once been Arthur Kensington's fiancée. The blow came during the main dinner, when most of the guests were gathered at tables, decorated with expensive floral arrangements and scented candles. Isabella rose gracefully from her chair, picking up a glass of champagne, calling for everyone's attention with that radiant smile that hid poison. She made an initial toast about charity and community, beautiful empty words that everyone expected at such events. People smiled politely, some already distracted and returning to their private conversations. But then, with a transition that seemed perfectly natural but was calculated down to the last detail, Isabella steered the subject into dangerous territory. "Speaking of charity," she mentioned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it's so important to do proper checks on the people we let into our lives, especially when vulnerable children are involved. Isn't that right, Arthur?" All eyes turned to Arthur, who stiffened immediately, realizing where this was going. Isabella continued, relentless. "I've come to understand that my dear ex-fiancé recently hired an employee who has a history of theft accusations. Of course, the case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but we all know that doesn't always mean innocence, just skill at covering one's tracks." The room fell silent. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. Grace Holloway, the housekeeper, accused of theft, looking after Arthur Kensington's orphaned daughter. The gossip formed and multiplied in real time. Arthur stood up, his face red with anger. "Isabella, that is completely inappropriate and based on lies." "They're public record, darling," she replied with venomous sweetness. "I'm just concerned for you and little Lily. Someone needs to protect this family's interests, since you seem incapable of doing it yourself." Arthur left the event immediately, but the damage was done. By the next morning, the gossip had already spread through London's social circles. Calls started coming in, restaurant clients asking questions, friends offering unsolicited advice, even Lily's, school called, concerned about rumors that had reached the ears of other parents. Grace learned everything from Mrs. Beatrice, who had heard it from a friend who worked for one of the families present at the dinner. She sat in the kitchen, her face in her hands, silent tears wetting her cheeks. She knew this was just the beginning. Isabella had declared war, and Grace didn't have the weapons or the resources to fight a woman with that kind of power and connections. All she had was the truth, and sometimes she knew all too well the truth wasn't enough. The weeks following the charity gala were the hardest Grace had ever faced since arriving at the mansion. The gossip spread like a plague, becoming more distorted with each telling. Some versions said she had been arrested, others that she had stolen thousands in jewelry. Arthur tried to contain the damage, making public statements about Grace's innocence, but the social stain was already set. Grace continued to work with double the dedication, as if she could erase the blemishes on her reputation through sheer effort. But she saw the looks from the suppliers who came to the house, heard the whispers that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Even some of the other staff who came to help on deep cleaning days treated her with poorly concealed suspicion. Lily, thankfully, remained oblivious to most of the adult drama. The girl continued to progress wonderfully, talking more each day, laughing more, being more present. She became Grace's constant shadow, following her around the house as she worked, chatting about school, about her drawings, about her friend Laura. It was Lily who first noticed when the necklace disappeared. The girl had developed a habit of visiting her parents' room, where Arthur kept the things that had belonged to his wife untouched. On a Tuesday afternoon, she came running down the stairs, her eyes wide with worry. "Auntie Grace, Mummy's necklace is gone," she said, her voice trembling. "Daddy is going to be so sad." Grace's heart sank. "Which necklace, sweetie?" "The one with pearls and diamonds. The one Daddy kept in the blue velvet box. It's always there, but today it's not." Grace went up with Lily to Arthur's room. The velvet box was indeed empty. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, an expensive item that Arthur kept as a precious memento of Eleanor. Grace remembered seeing it only once when she was cleaning the room, and Arthur opened the box to show her, talking about how his wife had worn it on their wedding day. "Let's look carefully," Grace said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her growing anxiety. "Maybe your daddy put it somewhere else." But a careful search revealed nothing. The necklace was simply nowhere in the room. Grace felt a cold pit in her stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When Arthur came home that night, Lily ran to him immediately. "Daddy, Mummy's necklace is gone." The color drained from Arthur's face. "What do you mean gone? Where was it kept?" "In the box, as always," he replied, already taking the stairs 2 at a time. Grace followed him, her heart pounding. Arthur searched the room, opening drawers, looking in every corner. Nothing. The necklace had vanished. He turned to Grace, and she saw the confusion and worry in his eyes, but not yet suspicion. Not yet. "I'll question all the staff," he said. "Someone must have seen something." But it was Mrs. Beatrice who reluctantly planted the first seed of doubt. "Mr. Arthur," she began, hesitantly. "I don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but Grace is the only one who has free access to every room in the house, including your bedroom." Grace felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "Mrs. Beatrice, I would never take something that wasn't mine. You know that." The housekeeper looked genuinely conflicted. "I know, dear, I know, but we have to consider all possibilities." Arthur held up a hand, interrupting. "Let's not make hasty accusations. We'll search the entire house systematically. The necklace must be somewhere." The search lasted for hours that felt like days. Every room was methodically turned upside down, every drawer opened and inspected, every corner illuminated with powerful torches. And then, in a moment, Grace would remember for the rest of her life, as the beginning of a nightmare from which it seemed impossible to wake, one of the gardeners helping with the search shouted from the first floor with an urgency that made everyone's blood run cold. "I've found something." Everyone rushed to Grace's room. The gardener was standing beside her bed, holding the blue velvet box. There was a poorly hidden package under the mattress, only partially concealed, and inside it was the pearl and diamond necklace, glittering under the lamplight like a silent accusation. Grace was frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I didn't put that there. I would never take that necklace." Arthur took the box from the gardener's hands, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "How did this get into your room, Grace?" "I don't know," she replied, tears starting to stream down her face. "Someone is setting me up, Arthur. Please, you have to believe me. Why would I steal something and hide it so poorly in my own room?" But Grace could see the doubt growing in his eyes. Isabella's words from the charity gala echoed in the air between them. A history of theft accusations, dismissed for lack of evidence, skill at covering one's tracks. Mrs. Beatrice put a hand to her mouth, tears in her own eyes. "I so wanted to be wrong," she murmured. Lily appeared at the door, her big eyes fixed on the necklace in her father's hands. "Auntie Grace didn't do it," the girl said with conviction. "Someone is being mean to her." But Lily's small voice was lost in the chaos that followed. Arthur asked everyone to leave the room except Grace. When they were alone, he looked at her with an expression that broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. It was a mixture of pain, confusion, and worst of all, distrust. "Grace, I trusted you," he said in a hoarse voice. "I let you into my home near my daughter. I believed you when you said the previous accusation was false. How could you do this?" "I didn't," Grace insisted, sobbing now. "Arthur, please think. Who benefits from this? Who wants to see me out of this house?" "Isabella," he thought aloud, but then shook his head. "No, that's paranoia. Isabella wouldn't have access to the house to plant evidence." "She has old copies of the keys," Grace argued desperately. "You lived together before you ended the engagement. She knows this house as well as you do." But Arthur wasn't listening. The pain of losing that necklace, the last physical piece that connected him to his deceased wife, was too great. And Grace represented the most obvious explanation, as much as it hurt to admit. "I want you to pack your things and leave," he said finally, each word coming out as if it physically pained him. "Tonight. I won't call the police out of consideration for everything you've done for Lily, but I don't want you in this house anymore." Grace staggered as if she'd been struck. "Arthur, please, don't do this. Let me prove my innocence. Let me help find out who really did this." "My mind is made up," he replied, turning his back so he wouldn't have to see the tears on her face. "Mrs. Beatrice will help you pack." An hour that felt like an eternity later, Grace was on the cold, dark street with a small, worn-out suitcase containing all her worldly possessions, everything she had accumulated through years of hard work and meticulous saving. A few worn but clean clothes, some beloved and reread books, photographs of places she had visited, small objects with no monetary value but laden with memories. She didn't have enough money for a hotel, not even for a cheap hostel in the outskirts. She had no family to run to, no distant relative who could offer a sofa for a few nights. Friends were few and scattered, people she had met at previous jobs, but with whom she hadn't kept close contact because she was always working, always saving, always focused on building a better future that never seemed to arrive. The only viable option was St. Francis's Shelter, a charity that housed vulnerable people, offering a bed, food, and basic dignity to those the world had forgotten or abandoned. Grace knew the place because she had made modest donations when she received her salary, contributing what little she could because she understood the importance of their work. Never, not even in her worst nightmares, did she imagine she would one day need those services. Herself, that she would be the vulnerable person in need of shelter. The shelter's coordinator, Sister Teresa, received her with a kindness that did not judge. She gave her a bed in a shared dormitory with other women, a small locker for her things, simple rules of coexistence. Grace accepted it all in a state of shock, still unable to fully process what had happened. That night, lying in a narrow bed in a room full of strangers, Grace allowed herself to truly cry. She cried for the injustice, for the betrayal, for the loss of a family she had begun to call her own. She cried for Lily, who would wake up tomorrow to find that Auntie Grace was gone. She cried for Arthur, who had chosen to believe the worst of her despite everything they had shared. But above all, Grace cried with anger. Anger at Isabella Vance because she knew, she was absolutely certain, that this woman was behind it. Isabella had promised that Arthur would regret it, and now she was fulfilling that promise in the cruelest way possible, using the sacred memory of a departed woman to destroy an innocent person's reputation. Back at the mansion, Lily did not accept the explanation her father tried to give. The girl cried, screamed, refused to eat. She locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out, wouldn't talk to anyone. The progress of months began to unravel in hours. Arthur stood at his daughter's door, listening to her sobs, his heart broken. Had he done the right thing by sending Grace away? Or had he just made the biggest mistake of his life? The doubts gnawed at him, but the necklace was in her room. The evidence was undeniable, or was it? In the quiet of the night, alone with his thoughts, Arthur began to question everything. But it was too late. The damage was done, and he didn't know how or if he could ever fix it. The following days were torment for everyone in the Kensington mansion. Lily refused to leave her room, barely touched the food Mrs. Beatrice left at her door, and spoke to no one. The silence that had taken so much effort to break returned with full force. But this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of trauma. It was the silence of rebellion, of deep sorrow, of a refusal to accept a reality she knew was wrong. Arthur tried everything. He talked through the closed door, begged her to eat something, explained that he had to make that difficult decision, but Lily didn't respond. There was only the occasional sound of muffled crying and the creak of the bed as she turned over. On the third day, Dr. Camille was called. She managed to get into the room after much persistence, finding Lily curled up in bed, clutching Fluffy the rabbit, with Grace's drawings scattered around her like a shrine of memories. "Lily, I need you to talk to me," the therapist said gently. "Your father is very worried." "Auntie Grace didn't steal anything," Lily finally said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Someone is lying, and Daddy believed the lie." "How can you be so sure?" Dr. Camille asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Because I know her," Lily replied with a conviction that was heartbreaking. "She taught me that good people don't hurt others. She is good. She wouldn't do something like that." But the therapist, as much as she empathized, could do little more than advise patients and suggest that Arthur seek additional professional help to deal with the crisis. Lily was entering a dangerous spiral, and if something didn't change soon, the consequences could be devastating. It was on the morning of the fourth day, as the sun barely began to light the room through the heavy curtains, that Lily made a decision that would change everything. If the adults couldn't see the truth that was so clear to her, if they were too blinded by pain or doubt to see that Auntie Grace would never do anything bad, then she would find the truth herself and show it to everyone. She waited patiently until she heard Arthur leave for the restaurant, his morning routine performed mechanically, as if he were a programmed automaton. She waited until Mrs. Beatrice left for the weekly grocery shopping, listening to the sound of the car driving away down the street. Only then did she leave her room for the first time in days, her eyes swollen from crying, but shining with a determination that was far beyond her young age. Lily started in the room where the necklace had been found, Grace's old room. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she trusted the instincts she had been developing. Auntie Grace always said that sometimes the answers are right in front of us. We just need to look carefully. The girl carefully went through each drawer, looked under the bed, checked the wardrobe. And then she saw something the adults had missed. A small piece of paper stuck between the mattress and the bed frame, almost invisible. With small but nimble fingers, Lily pulled out the paper. It was a note, handwritten in an elegant slanted script. Lily was still learning to read cursive, but she managed to decipher the words slowly. Her heart raced as she understood what she was reading. The note clearly and directly laid out the plan to steal the necklace and plant it in Grace's room. It mentioned using the old key that still worked on the back door. It described the best time to enter without being seen. And at the end, there was a signature that Lily recognized from the times she had seen the woman sign documents during her visits. Isabella Vance. Lily grabbed the paper and ran downstairs, shouting for Mrs. Beatrice. The housekeeper appeared from the laundry room, startled by the noise. "Granny B, I found proof," Lily shouted, the words tumbling out. "The mean lady framed Auntie Grace. It's all here." Mrs. Beatrice took the note with trembling hands, reading and rereading the words, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "My goodness," she murmured. "That creature really did this." The housekeeper immediately called Arthur, who abandoned an important meeting at the restaurant and rushed home. When he arrived, he found Lily and Mrs. Beatrice in the living room, the note on the coffee table like damning evidence. Arthur read the note 3 times, his face shifting from confusion to anger and finally to horror. "She planned everything," he said, his voice trembling. "Isabella came in here, stole Eleanor's necklace and framed Grace. And I believed it. I threw an innocent woman out because of a setup." "Daddy, you have to bring Auntie Grace back," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "You have to tell her you're sorry." But Arthur knew an apology wouldn't be enough. He needed more proof before confronting Isabella. The note was damning, but Isabella could claim it was a forgery, that someone had fabricated it. He needed something irrefutable. That's when he remembered the phone records. If Isabella had planned this, she probably had to make calls, coordinate, perhaps even hire someone to help her. Arthur called Marcus Thorne and explained the situation. The investigator worked quickly. Within 2 days, he had Isabella's phone records from the weeks leading up to the necklace's disappearance, and there, clear as day, was the evidence they needed. Multiple calls to a locksmith who admitted, when pressed, to making copies of old keys for Isabella. Text messages to a friend where Isabella hinted that Arthur would soon see he was making a mistake by trusting lower-class people. Arthur had everything he needed. But before confronting Isabella, he had to do something more important. He had to find Grace and beg for her forgiveness. With Marcus's help, he traced Grace to St. Francis's shelter. The investigator had called every charity shelter in the city until he found her. When Arthur arrived at the location on that rainy Thursday afternoon, his heart was broken with guilt and regret. Sister Teresa received him with an expression that made it clear she knew who he was and what he had done. "Grace is in the back garden," she said coldly. "And if you're going to hurt her anymore, I suggest you turn around right now." "I've come to ask for forgiveness," Arthur replied humbly, "and to prove she is innocent." He found Grace sitting on a weathered wooden bench, looking at a flower bed she had helped plant in the preceding days. She was thinner, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but she still had that dignity he had always admired in her. "Grace," he called out softly. She turned, and the expression on her face when she saw him was like a punch to Arthur's gut. Pain, anger, disappointment, all mixed into a mask of suffering that he had caused. "What do you want?" she asked in a tired voice. Arthur approached slowly, as if she were a frightened bird that might fly away at any moment. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness. You were right. Isabella set everything up. Lily found a note that proves the conspiracy. We have phone records, the locksmith's testimony, everything." He held out a folder with all the evidence. Grace took it with trembling hands, reading each document with growing attention. When she finished, tears were streaming silently down her face. "You really thought I would do that?" she asked, her voice broken. "After everything we went through together, after how I cared for Lily, you really believed I would steal something so precious from you?" Arthur choked on his own words. "I was a fool, a coward. I let my own insecurities and Isabella's venomous words cloud my judgment. There's no excuse for what I did." "You threw me out on the street, Arthur," Grace said, rising from the bench. "You took me away from the only family I had. You broke Lily's heart, and now you come here with, papers and expect everything to be okay." "I don't expect it to be okay," he answered honestly. "I only hope for the chance to try and fix what I broke. Please, Grace, come home. Lily needs you. I need you." Grace turned, facing him with eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. "And what if Isabella sets me up again? What if next time you believe her instead of me?" Arthur took a step forward, his hands trembling with the urge to touch her but not daring to. "There won't be a next time. I'm going to confront her with the evidence. I'm going to sue her for breaking and entering, theft, defamation, everything I can. She will pay for what she did." "That doesn't change what you did," Grace said, but her voice had less harshness now. "It doesn't erase the pain." "I know," Arthur admitted, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll give me that chance." Grace looked at the evidence in her hands, then at the broken man before her. Part of her wanted to reject him, to make him feel the same pain she had felt. But another part, the part that cared too much for this shattered family, knew that anger would only cause more suffering. "I need time," she said finally. "I can't just go back and act like nothing happened." "As much time as you need," Arthur promised. "But please, at least come and see Lily. She collapsed after you left. She stopped talking again, stopped eating. She's losing herself, and I don't know how to reach her." The mention of Lily broke down Grace's last defenses. "I'll see her," she agreed. "But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you or that things will go back to how they were." Arthur nodded, tears of relief filling his eyes. "It's more than I deserve. Thank you." Grace returned to the mansion that same afternoon, but not as an employee. Arthur insisted she stay as a guest of the family, at least until things were sorted out. Mrs. Beatrice prepared one of the main guest rooms, not the small service room where Grace had slept before. It was a subtle but significant difference, a way of showing that her status had changed, that she was no longer just the housekeeper. When Lily heard that, Auntie Grace was in the house. She ran down the stairs so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. She threw herself into Grace's arms with a force that almost knocked them both over, sobbing and laughing at the same time. "You came back," the girl said between tears. "I knew you would come back. I found the proof, Auntie Grace. I found the mean lady's note." Grace hugged Lily tightly, her own tears wetting the girl's hair. "You are so brave, my little detective. Very clever and very brave." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, making up for lost time. Lily showed her new drawings, told her about the nightmares she'd had, about how she had missed Grace every second of every day. And Grace listened to it all, absorbed all that pain and love, feeling her own heart begin to heal. But there was a pending conversation that couldn't be postponed. Arthur needed to confront Isabella. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, exhausted in Grace's arms, he made the call he had been planning all day. Isabella answered on the third ring, her voice holding that false sweetness he now recognized for what it was, poison disguised as honey. "Arthur, what a pleasant surprise. Have you finally realized your mistake?" "Oh, I've realized a mistake," he replied with icy calm. "But it's not the one you think. I need you to come to my house tomorrow at 8 in the evening. We have important matters to discuss." Isabella laughed, a cheerful, confident sound. "Of course, darling. I knew you'd eventually see the light. See you tomorrow." Arthur hung up the phone, his hands shaking with rage. Marcus Thorne was already prepared. He had installed discreet recording equipment in the living room. Everything Isabella said would be recorded, admissible in court if necessary. The next morning, as they waited for the evening to arrive, Grace and Arthur had a conversation that had been postponed since she returned. They sat in the garden, on a bench under an old apple tree. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the stone ground. "I am so sorry for what I did," Arthur began, looking at his own hands. "There are not enough words to express how much I regret doubting you." Grace was silent for a long moment. The pain was still there, fresh and pulsating, but it was beginning to be tempered by understanding. "You were hurting," she said finally. "That necklace was the last physical connection to your wife. When you thought I had stolen it, you reacted with emotion, not reason." "That's no excuse," Arthur insisted. "You deserved my trust, my faith. You deserved for me to investigate properly before throwing you out." Grace turned to face him. "Do you want to know the worst part? It wasn't being thrown out. It wasn't sleeping in a shelter or going hungry or feeling ashamed. It was realizing that after everything we had built, after how we connected through the search for your brother after Lily, you still chose to believe the worst version of me." The words hit Arthur like physical blows. "You're right," he admitted, his voice choked, "and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But please give me the chance to prove that I've learned, that I've changed." Grace took a deep breath. "I want to believe that, Arthur. But trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It will take time. I have all the time in the world, he promised, and I will use every second to show you that I am worthy of your trust. That evening, Isabella arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, wearing an emerald green dress that enhanced her eyes, perfect makeup, confidence radiating from every pore. She entered the living room as if she owned the place, settling onto the sofa with studied grace. "So," she began with a smile, "have you finally made the sensible decision to dismiss that troublesome employee?" Arthur was sitting in an opposite armchair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were as hard as stone. "Actually, Isabella, Grace is here in the house, as my special guest." Isabella's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Your guest? Arthur, she stole from you. They found the necklace in her room." "Yes, it was found there," Arthur agreed, "because you put it there." Isabella's mask was visibly cracking now. "What are you talking about? That's absurd." Arthur slid the folder with the evidence across the coffee table. "I have the note you wrote, detailing your entire plan. I have phone records showing your calls to the locksmith who made copies of the old keys. I have text messages to your friend boasting about how you were going to make me see my mistake." Isabella picked up the folder with hands that were beginning to tremble, flipping through the documents. Her face lost its color with each turned page. All of this, could have been forged," she tried, but the conviction had vanished from her voice. "You can try that argument in court," Arthur said coldly, "because I'm going to sue you for breaking and entering, theft, defamation, everything my lawyer can think of. You will pay for what you did to Grace, to my daughter, to me." Isabella stood up abruptly, the folder falling to the floor and scattering documents everywhere like autumn leaves. Her eyes, once so confident and controlled, now showed barely concealed panic. "You're making a huge mistake, Arthur," she said, her voice trying to sound threatening, but only revealing growing desperation. "That woman is not who you think she is. She's using you, manipulating your feelings, using your vulnerable daughter to secure a comfortable position. It's all calculated, coldly planned from day one. Can't you see that? She's a con artist, an opportunist who found the perfect victim in you." "No," Arthur corrected, standing up as well. "You were the one using me. You were obsessed with getting me back, not because you love me, but because you can't stand to lose. And when you realized Grace was an obstacle, you decided to destroy her in the cruelest way possible." Isabella laughed, a hysterical, humorless sound. "Grace, always Grace. You're in love with your housekeeper, and you're too much of a fool to admit it. You're going to throw away your social standing, your reputation. For what? For a woman who grew up in an orphanage?" "Yes," Arthur replied with a conviction that surprised even himself. "Because she's worth 1,000 of you. Because she has genuine kindness, real courage, true love. Things you've never known because you're too busy manipulating people." It was then that Isabella made her fatal mistake. Unaware she was being recorded, she let her anger overcome her prudence. "You want to know the truth?" she screamed. "Yes, I planned it all. I paid to get access to the house. I stole that ridiculous necklace, and I planted it in her room. And it was easy, unbelievably easy, because you are a sentimental fool. I thought after years together you knew me, trusted me, but all it took was for that woman to show up with her sob story about your long-lost brother, and you melted." Arthur felt a dark satisfaction as Isabella completely incriminated herself. "Thank you for the confession," he said calmly. "It's all on tape, of course. This audio will be handed over to my lawyer tomorrow morning." The color drained completely from Isabella's face. "You recorded me? That's illegal." "Actually," Marcus Thorne explained, stepping out from behind a screen where he had been hiding, "it's perfectly legal when there's a well-founded suspicion of a crime. And considering the evidence we already had, the recording is just the icing on the cake." Isabella looked from Arthur to Marcus, realizing she was cornered. "Your father may have facilitated illegal adoptions, he may have covered up crimes," Arthur continued, "but at least he didn't stoop to framing innocent people out of petty jealousy. You're worse than he was, Isabella. At least he had profit as a motive. You did all of this out of pure malice." Isabella tried one last time. "Arthur, please, we can resolve this civilly. There's no need to involve lawyers and courts." But Arthur had already made his decision. I want you out of my house now and never come back. You'll be served with the lawsuit in the coming days, and if you try to approach me, Grace, or especially Lily, I will add harassment to the charges." Isabella left, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the walls trembled. But this time her anger was impotent. She knew she had lost, completely and irrevocably. Grace, who had watched everything from an adjacent room, came out slowly. She saw the expression on Arthur's face, a mixture of relief and sadness. "It's over," he said simply. "She confessed to everything." Grace nodded. "Yes, it's over, but what now?" Arthur approached her, stopping at a respectful distance. "Now comes the hard part. Rebuilding the trust I broke, proving that I deserve a second chance, and continuing the search for my brother because that search brought us together and I'm not giving up on it." Grace felt something stir in her chest, the feeling she had been trying to deny for months. "I won't lie and say I've completely forgiven you," she said. "It still hurts. I still have moments when I remember being in that shelter, alone and scared." "I know," Arthur replied, "and I'll do whatever it takes to make up for it." Grace held out her hand, and when Arthur took it, she felt a spark of hope. "Let's try again then, but slowly, without rushing, rebuilding brick by brick." "Slowly is perfect," Arthur agreed, squeezing her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Because some things are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth whatever effort it takes. And you, Grace Holloway, are worth all of that and more." The months following the confrontation with Isabella were a period of slow but steady healing. The legal case against her moved forward, and Grace decided not only to testify but also to sue for emotional damages. Arthur's lawyer ensured that Isabella would face real consequences for her actions. But the most important thing was the rebuilding happening inside the mansion. Arthur kept his promise to win back Grace's trust day by day. Small gestures, genuine attention, absolute respect for the boundaries she set. Grace was no longer an employee. She was part of the family, and everyone in the house understood that clearly. Lily blossomed like a flower after the rain. She returned to school full-time, made more friends, and started art classes at a nearby school. Her therapist was amazed by the girl's progress, admitting she had never seen such a complete recovery from such deep trauma. And the investigation into Daniel continued, now with renewed urgency. Marcus Thorne had expanded the search nationwide, following leads that sometimes seemed promising, other times led to dead ends. It was on a Saturday morning, while Grace and Lily were making pancakes in the kitchen and Arthur was reading the newspaper at the table, that the phone rang. Arthur answered, expecting a routine call, but Marcus's voice on the other end had a different energy, a restrained excitement. "Mr. Kensington, I need you to come to my office immediately. And bring Grace. I think we've found your brother." Arthur nearly dropped the phone. "What? Are you sure?" "I can't be completely sure until you confirm in person, but the evidence is very compelling. Please, come as quickly as you can." Arthur, Grace and Lily arrived at Marcus's office in less than an hour. The investigator was waiting for them with a thick folder and photos spread across the table. I followed her. "A lead that seemed impossible at first," Marcus explained. "Grace mentioned that Daniel ran away from the orphanage at 16, saying he was going to find his family. I started thinking, where would a teenager with no resources go? How would he survive?" Arthur and Grace leaned over the photos, their hearts pounding. "I investigated homeless shelters, social assistance programs, records of vulnerable minors, and I found something interesting. A young man who spent a few months in a shelter in Bristol 15 years ago. The registered name was Daniel Smith, the same false identity used at the orphanage. The shelter, staff remembered him as a quiet but determined boy who got a job in the kitchen of a local diner." Grace looked at the old photos with tears in her eyes. "It's him," she murmured. "Even older. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere." Marcus nodded, satisfied. "I followed his trail through several jobs in different kitchens. Daniel had a natural talent for cooking, working his way up from assistant to cook, then to chef. He moved several times, always looking for better opportunities, but also, according to people who knew him, looking for something more. For a family he insisted he had lost." "And where is he now?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. Marcus slid a more recent photo across the table. Manchester. He works as a head chef at a social project called Flavors of the Street, which provides free meals for vulnerable people. Ironically, he was in that situation himself years ago and now gives back by helping others. Arthur took the photo with trembling hands. The man in the picture was in his late 30s, with dark hair slightly grey at the temples, a face marked by years of struggle but with kind eyes, and there, clearly visible, in the photo was the birthmark on his neck, on the right side just below his ear. "It's him," Arthur whispered. "My God, it's really him." Grace squeezed Arthur's hand, her own tears falling freely. "Daniel is alive. After all these years, he's alive." Marcus smiled, clearly pleased with his work. "But there's something else you need to know. I spoke with some people who work with him at the social project. They say he often talks about having a twin brother, about being separated from his family as a child. People thought it was a story he made up to cope with abandonment, but Daniel insists it's true. He never gave up looking." Arthur covered his face with his hands, sobbing. "All this time, he was looking for me, just as I was looking for him." Lily, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, asked, "Can we go see him? Meet Uncle Daniel?" Marcus already had everything arranged. "I didn't want to make direct contact without your confirmation first, but if you want, we can travel to Manchester today. I have the address of the social project where he works." The car journey took about 4 hours, but felt like an eternity. Arthur drove in silence, lost in thought while Grace sat in the passenger seat holding his free hand. Lily chattered nervously in the back, asking questions, imagining what her uncle she had never met would be like. When they arrived at Flavors of the Street, it was mid-afternoon. The place was simple, a converted warehouse with long tables and an industrial kitchen. The smell of home-cooked food hung in the air, and about 50 people were eating peacefully, talking, laughing. A man was working in the kitchen, visible through a service window, carefully plating dishes with a constant smile. Even from behind, even after 30 years, Arthur recognized the shape of his shoulders, the tilt of his head. It was like looking in a mirror from the past. Marcus approached first, speaking discreetly with a volunteer. The woman waved to the man in the kitchen. "Daniel, there's someone here who wants to talk to you." Daniel turned, wiping his hands on an apron stained with tomato sauce. His eyes scanned the group of visitors, passing over Marcus, Lily, Grace, and then landing on Arthur. And in that instant, the world stopped. The two men stared at each other across the crowded room, twins separated for nearly 30 years by cruel criminal circumstances, finally in the same space again after decades of tireless searching. Time seemed to stop, frozen in that impossible, miraculous moment. Daniel dropped the dish towel he was holding, his hands shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with absolute shock, as if he were seeing a ghost or hallucinating from years of frustrated hope. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's you. After all these years, it's really you." Arthur couldn't speak. He simply walked across the room, his steps quickening until he was running. Daniel came out of the kitchen, and they met in the middle, embracing with a force that held decades of longing, pain, searching, and finally, reunion. Everyone in the room stopped eating to watch the scene. Many were crying openly, touched by the raw, palpable emotion of the two reunited brothers. "I looked for you," Daniel said between sobs. "All my life, I looked. I remembered you, our father cooking, the house. Everyone said it was my imagination, but I knew it was real." "I looked for you too," Arthur replied. "I thought you had died at that lake. It was ruled as such. But he gestured to Grace, she told me you were alive, that you had lived in the orphanage with her." Daniel looked at Grace, and recognition shone in his eyes. "Grace? Little Grace from the orphanage? I can't believe it." Grace approached, laughing and crying at the same time. "Hi, Daniel, it's been a long time." Daniel hugged her too, holding her with gratitude. "You found him. After all these years, you brought us together." It was then that Daniel noticed Lily half hidden behind Grace. "And who is this little princess?" "This is Lily? Arthur introduced, pulling his daughter closer. Your niece. Daniel crouched down to be at the girl's level, his eyes shining with tears. Hello, Lily. I'm your Uncle Daniel. I didn't even know you existed, but I already love you. Lily, always shy with strangers, surprised everyone by stepping forward and hugging Daniel. You look a lot like Daddy, she said, but with more grey hair. The laugh that burst from Daniel was pure joy. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the social project, Daniel showing them his work, telling his story. He spoke of the kidnapping he only vaguely remembered, of the adoptive parents who were kind until they passed away, of the difficult years at the orphanage, of running away at 16 determined to find the family he knew was real. I worked in dozens of kitchens, he recounted. I learned to cook because it was the only thing that connected me to faint memories of our father. I remembered him in the kitchen. I remembered the smell, the love he put into every dish, and then I discovered I had a talent for it. Arthur listened to it all, his heart breaking and mending simultaneously. Everything you went through, all the pain, was because of greedy criminals. The father of someone I knew facilitated the kidnapping and the cover-up. Daniel placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. It doesn't matter how I got here anymore. What matters is that we've finally found each other, that we have a chance to make up for lost time. As the sun began to set, Daniel asked, "Where are you staying? We need to plan what's next." "You're coming back to London with us," Arthur said firmly. "You'll live with me, you'll see the mansion where we grew up. You'll work with me at the restaurant if you want. We're going to reclaim the years that were stolen from us." Daniel looked at the social project, at the people who depended on him. "I can't just abandon this. These people need me." "Then we'll bring it to London too," Grace suggested. "Expand the project, reach more people. With Arthur's resources and your expertise, Daniel, you could make a difference on a much larger scale." And so, as night fell over Manchester, a family that had been destroyed 30 years ago began to rebuild itself. Two brothers reunited, a girl who had gained an uncle, a woman who had helped make the impossible happen. The road to get there had been long and painful, but the destination, finally, was worth every tear shed, every night of searching, every moment of pain. Because in the end, love had won, the truth had prevailed, and a family was whole once more. Daniel's move to London happened 3 weeks after their reunion. Arthur insisted on helping him with everything, from transporting his few belongings to finding the perfect place to expand the flavors of the street project in the capital. Together, the brothers rented a large space in the city centre and began setting up an operation that would feed hundreds of people daily. Working side by side revealed not only physical similarities between the twins, but also deep personality connections. Both were perfectionists in the kitchen, both had the same dry sense of humor, both made the same gesture of wrinkling their nose when concentrating. It was as if the 30 years of separation hadn't managed to erase the bond that had united them since before they were born. Lily adored having an uncle. Daniel spoiled her with attention and simple but meaningful gifts, taught her to cook basic dishes, and told her stories about his adventures on the road over the years. The girl flourished even more with this expanded family love, and Arthur watched it all with a heart overflowing with gratitude. Meanwhile, the case against Isabella Vance came to an end. The recorded confession, combined with all the other evidence, left little room for defense. Isabella was ordered to pay substantial compensation to both Arthur and Grace, in addition to completing community service and having a permanent criminal record. Her reputation in London's social circles was destroyed, and many of her so-called friends abandoned her as soon as the scandal broke. Arthur felt no satisfaction in Isabella's downfall, only a distant sadness for the waste she had made of her own life out of pride and obsession. But mostly, he felt relief that this chapter was finally closed. It was during this period of rebuilding and healing that Arthur realized how much his feelings for Grace had evolved. It was no longer gratitude for what she had done for Lily, nor admiration for her strength of character. It was something deeper, more complete. It was love, pure and simple, the kind that grows slowly but puts down roots impossible to pull up. Grace also felt the change between them. The conversations that stretched late into the night, the gazes that lingered a second too long, the accidental touches that seemed to carry electricity. She fought against these feelings at first, still carrying the scars of being thrown out, of having her trust broken. But slowly, as Arthur proved day after day that he had changed, that he had learned, that he was worthy of trust, Grace's defenses began to fall. It was Daniel who first noticed what was happening. One evening, as the three adults were having dinner together after Lily was asleep, he observed the way Arthur looked at Grace, how she smiled at him, the undeniable chemistry that pulsed between them. "You two need to stop dancing around this and just admit what you feel," he said with the kind of frankness only a brother can have. Arthur nearly choked on his wine. "What are you talking about?" Daniel laughed. "I'm talking about the fact that you're obviously in love with each other but are too scared to do anything about it." Grace blushed. "Daniel, it's not that simple. We have a complicated history." "Every real love story is complicated," Daniel replied wisely. "But you've already been through the hard part. You've survived lies, betrayal, pain. If that didn't destroy what's between you, nothing will." That night, after Daniel had gone to his new flat, Arthur and Grace were left alone on the terrace, looking at the city lights. "He's right, you know," Arthur said softly, "about how I feel about you." Grace turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Arthur, I can't just be a reaction to your loneliness or gratitude for what I did for Lily." "It's not that," he assured her, gently taking her hand. "It's you, Grace. Your strength, your kindness, the way you love my daughter as if she were your own, the way you brought my family back together when everyone thought it was impossible, the way you forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. I'm in love with you, completely and irrevocably." Grace felt tears fill her eyes. "I love you too," she finally admitted. "I'm scared, but I love you." Arthur pulled her closer, their foreheads touching. "Then let's be scared together. Let's build something new, something ours, slowly and carefully." Their first kiss was soft, tentative, filled with promises and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling through tears. The following months were magical. Arthur and Grace were officially dating, building a relationship based on honesty, communication, and mutual respect. Lily was ecstatic to learn that Auntie Grace would be more than just an aunt, that there was a chance they could become a real family. Daniel expanded the flavors of the street project with impressive success, attracting donations and volunteers, feeding more than 300 people daily. He also started working part-time at Arthur's restaurant, creating special dishes that became instant customer favorites. It was on a Saturday night, 6 months after they had declared their feelings, that Arthur decided to take the next step. He organized a special dinner at the mansion, inviting Daniel, Mrs. Beatrice, and a few close friends. But the most important moment would be just for Grace and Lily. After dinner, when the guests had left, Arthur asked Grace and Lily to meet him in the garden. The two went down together, intrigued by the mystery. The garden was transformed. Hundreds of candles created an illuminated path to the gazebo in the center, which was decorated with white flowers and fairy lights. It was magical, like something out of a fairy tale. Arthur was waiting in the gazebo, wearing an elegant suit, his nervousness visible in every line of his body. When Grace and Lily approached, he held out a hand to both of them. "Grace Holloway," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "you came into my life as an employee and became my salvation. You brought light into this dark house, gave a voice to my silent daughter, reunited my broken family. But above all, you taught me that it's possible to love again, to trust again, to build again." He knelt down, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring, a pearl surrounded by small diamonds. "Would you do me the honor of marrying me? Of officially becoming part of this family that you have already completed with your presence?" Grace covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Arthur slid the ring onto her finger and then turned to Lily. And you, my princess, would you like Grace to officially be your mother? We can start the adoption process if you want." Lily threw herself into both their arms, laughing and crying. "I do, I really do. I want us to be a real family." The wedding took place 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a white dress with pink details that she had helped choose herself. Daniel was Arthur's best man, holding the rings and giving a moving speech about second chances and rebuilt families. Grace wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair down with white flowers woven into it. As she walked down the makeshift aisle in the garden, she looked at the people gathered there, all those who had become her family. Mrs. Beatrice crying discreetly into a handkerchief, Sister Teresa from the shelter who had been invited and was smiling proudly, Lily's friends from school, Arthur and Daniel's colleagues. But her eyes fixed on Arthur waiting at the altar, and everything else disappeared. There was the man who had made mistakes but learned from them, who loved her with the full intensity of his wounded but healing heart. The vows were simple, but profound. Promises of love, respect, partnership, forgiveness. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the kiss was met with applause and tears of joy from everyone present. The party that followed was joyful and full of love. Daniel personally prepared all the food, creating a feast that celebrated not only Arthur and Grace's union, but the reunion of a family that fate had tried to destroy, but love had managed to save. Months later, Lily's adoption was finalized. Grace Holloway Kensington officially became the girl's mother, and in no document or heart was there any difference between biological ties and chosen bonds. The love was the same, complete and unconditional. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Arthur and Daniel ran the restaurant together, creating dishes that blended refined technique with genuine love. The flavors of the street project continued to grow, with a second location now in the planning stages. Lily thrived at school, her art beginning to gain recognition in small local exhibitions. And Grace found her place not only as a wife and mother, but as a social projects manager, using her life experience to help others in vulnerable situations. She worked especially with orphanages, ensuring that children had the opportunities and love that she and Daniel had to fight so hard to find. On a Sunday evening, the family gathered around the dinner table. Arthur raised his glass in a toast. "To this family," he said with an emotional voice, "to the brothers whom fate separated but love reunited, to the daughter who found her voice and her heart, and especially to the extraordinary woman who made all of this possible." Grace smiled, her heart overflowing. "It wasn't just me," she corrected. "It was all of us together, refusing to give up, choosing to believe that miracles are possible." Daniel raised his glass too. "To miracles, then, and to second chances." Lily, always the wisest despite her young age, added, "And to the love that makes everything possible." They toasted together, a family that had been broken and scattered, but was now whole, healed, stronger for everything they had faced together. And as laughter filled the mansion that was no longer dark or silent, but vibrant with life and love, they all knew they had found something precious. They had found their way back home to each other, to where they had always belonged. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Arthur, Grace, Daniel and Lily has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours in telling it. Stories like this remind us that even in the darkest moments, hope can flourish, families can be rebuilt, and true love always finds a way. If you were moved by this journey of reunions, forgiveness, and second chances, be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking the button below. Leave a like on this video so that more people can discover this special story. And in the comments, tell us what you enjoyed most about this narrative. Do you believe in second chances? Have you ever experienced an impossible reunion? Share your story with us. Every day, we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of life, the power of forgiveness, and the strength of love. Don't miss our upcoming content. Until the next story, and remember, never give up searching for those you love, because miracles happen when we least expect them.